For more than half a century, Pete Maravich's NCAA scoring record seemed destined to remain untouched. It wasn't just an impressive achievement, it had become one of basketball's most legendary milestones. Decades passed, and countless superstars came and went, yet the record continued to stand. Then a sharpshooter from Iowa arrived and changed the conversation entirely. Caitlin Clark entered college basketball with extraordinary range, relentless confidence, and a work ethic forged through countless hours of practice when nobody was watching. From the very beginning, she wasn't simply pursuing greatness, she was creating a new standard. As her numbers climbed, so did the attention surrounding the sport. This is the story of the milestone that captured the attention of an entire generation, the record that inspired millions and reshaped the sports landscape. But to fully appreciate what Caitlin Clark achieved, you first have to understand the challenge standing in front of her. The NCAA's all-time scoring record wasn't just another statistic, it was a barrier that many believed could never be broken.
Caitlin Clark becomes the all-time leading scorer in major college basketball history.
It was a benchmark that seemed completely out of reach, even for the greatest names the sport has ever produced. For more than 5 decades, the NCAA scoring crown belonged to Pete Maravich, the legendary LSU guard who starred from 1967 to 1970. By the time his college career ended, he had accumulated an incredible 3,667 points, a number so astonishing that generation after generation of elite players failed to surpass it. Maravich played during a completely different era of basketball, one without the benefit of a three-point line. Every basket counted for only 2 points unless it came from the free throw line, making his scoring totals even more difficult to comprehend. That reality only added to the mystique surrounding the record and reinforced the belief that it might never be challenged, let alone broken.
A steal by Hudson of Atlanta, to DeBusschere of New York, to Maravich of Atlanta. Beautiful pass to Collins.
Maravich's record becomes even more incredible when you look at the conditions under which he achieved it. He played before the introduction of the shot clock, long before today's faster, possession-heavy style of basketball. Freshmen were also barred from varsity play at the time, limiting him to just 3 collegiate seasons instead of the 4 years players typically have today. Despite those limitations, Maravich produced numbers that seemed almost unreal, averaging more than 44 points per game throughout his college career. In only 3 seasons, he established a scoring standard that many believed would never be threatened. Over the decades, some of the most iconic figures in basketball history passed through the college ranks. Oscar Robertson, Jerry West, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and Michael Jordan, but none managed to get within striking distance of the mark he left behind.
Looks like 5 straight shots now. Here they come again. 93-76. LSU leading. It's the Pink, a 21-footer.
For decades, the record barely seemed worth debating because no one was remotely close to challenging it. The reason Maravich's mark felt untouchable wasn't just the massive point total, it was the unique conditions under which he achieved it. The result was a career total so far ahead of everyone else that generations of players couldn't come close. Year after year, elite scorers entered college basketball and left without seriously threatening the record. As the sport evolved into the modern era, with the introduction of the three-point line, the shot clock, and faster-paced offenses, the gap still remained. Maravich's achievement continued to tower over the game, looking less like a record and more like a piece of basketball history that would never be touched.
Curry spins, lost the ball, dribbles, 8 to shoot, crossover, sticks a 3 in front of the cap bench, it's good!
As basketball evolved into a faster, higher scoring sport, Maravich's record somehow remained untouched. After so many years, it no longer felt like a target for future players. It felt like a piece of mythology woven into the history of the game. At the same time, athletes benefited from advances in training, nutrition, conditioning, and player development that previous generations could only imagine. Modern players became stronger, quicker, and more technically refined than ever before. On paper, these advantages should have made breaking long-standing records easier. Yet despite all of those changes, Maravich's scoring mark continued to stand above the rest, reinforcing the belief that it might never be surpassed.
From half court, and Golden State wins it.
For nearly 4 decades after the three-point line became part of college basketball, players benefited from a faster pace, more possessions, and a style of play built to generate offense. Yet even in the highest scoring era the sport had ever experienced, Maravich's record remained comfortably out of reach. Year after year, elite scorers came and went, but the gap never truly disappeared. Around the same time, another name often entered conversations about basketball scoring greatness: LeBron James. When LeBron burst onto the national scene as a teenage phenom in the early 2000s, he quickly became one of the most talked about prospects the sport had ever seen. At just 17 years old, he was already drawing national television coverage and carrying expectations that few young athletes had ever faced. From the beginning, many believed they were watching a player capable of rewriting basketball history.
Here he comes the other way. There's your first James Jam of his career.
Long before he reached the NBA, LeBron James was already carrying enormous expectations. He was famously labeled the Chosen One while still in high school, with many viewing him as a future basketball legend before he had played a single professional game. But when the time came, LeBron skipped college entirely and entered the NBA straight out of high school in 2003. The comparison to LeBron resonates for a reason. It's not because they share the same accomplishments, but because both became defining figures of their basketball generations. LeBron came to represent excellence and greatness for millions of fans, and as Clark steadily climbed toward Maravich's historic total, it became clear that she was creating a similar level of impact, capturing attention, reshaping expectations, and turning what once seemed impossible into a real possibility.
Iowa's Caitlin Clark dethroning Pistol Pete Maravich to become the top scorer in college basketball history.
As Caitlin Clark continued her historic rise, the sports world naturally began using the same kind of language reserved for the game's most transformative figures. Discussions about records quickly evolved into conversations about legacy, influence, and greatness. She had moved beyond being a standout player and entered a category occupied by only a handful of athletes. That level of recognition wasn't handed to her. It was something she earned through her performance and impact on the sport. The story of basketball's newest superstar began on January 22, 2002, when Caitlin Clark was born in Des Moines, Iowa. She was raised in nearby West Des Moines, growing up in a state where basketball holds a special place in the culture. From an early age, the game was woven into everyday life. The sight of hoops and driveways and the constant rhythm of basketballs bouncing on neighborhood courts were simply part of the environment around her, helping shape the passion that would eventually carry her to the national stage.
So you noticed even in the driveway that she liked to shoot the ball from a long ways away?
Well, it took some time, but certainly, I mean, she's played enough.
Basketball was deeply rooted in Caitlin Clark's family long before she became a household name. Her father, Brent Clark, played at the collegiate level, and her brothers were heavily involved in the sport as well. For Caitlin, basketball wasn't just one activity among many, it was a constant presence throughout her childhood. Those around her quickly noticed a level of focus and determination that set her apart from her peers. Much of her time was spent refining her jump shot. Hours of repetition helped her build a level of shooting confidence that was uncommon for players her age. Over time, she expanded her range far beyond the traditional three-point line, becoming comfortable taking shots that most players wouldn't even consider. Deep pull-up threes, long-range attempts in transition, and shots launched from near the logo gradually became part of her game, laying the foundation for the style that would later make her one of basketball's most recognizable stars.
Wheeler finds Clark from the logo.
She took those deep shots with the poise of a player who had already practiced them countless times long before the spotlight ever found her. Her extraordinary range wasn't about attracting attention or creating highlights. It was a reflection of the work she had put in behind the scenes. Every long-distance jumper represented years of dedication and repetition. Those who watched her train during her high school years often came away amazed. Seeing her casually fire shots from 35 feet and beyond felt almost surreal. Most players would treat those attempts as desperation heaves, but Clark approached them with the same comfort and confidence that others bring to a routine layup. The remarkable part wasn't that she was willing to take those shots, it was that they consistently found the bottom of the net.
Clark, another long three. She's back.
But she was doing it at a level that made it clear this wasn't just confidence, it was true mastery of a skill most players never fully develop. By the time Caitlin Clark arrived at Iowa and started replicating those deep-range shots in Big Ten competition, the reaction was immediate. Logo pull-ups, long-range threes in transition with defenders rushing to contest. At first, opponents and coaches assumed it was poor shot selection or unnecessary risk. By the time recruiting evaluations were underway, Clark was far from unknown. She was already established as a 5-star prospect, ranked among the top high school players in the nation. Ultimately, she chose the University of Iowa, staying in her home state and representing the place that had watched her develop from the beginning. Her freshman season in 2020-2021 immediately confirmed the hype. She delivered at an elite level right away, averaging over 26 points per game and earning Big Ten Freshman of the Year honors, an early sign that her game was built for something much bigger than the college stage.
Caitlin Clark has been named the Big Ten Player of the Year. This is the 3rd year in a row that Clark has won this honor.
By the time Caitlin Clark reached her sophomore year, the narrative around her had completely shifted. This was no longer about potential or gradual development. She had arrived. Her games wasn't just improving, it was exploding onto the national stage. Carver Hawkeye Arena, Iowa's home court, which had occasionally struggled to reach full capacity in previous seasons, quickly transformed into one of the most in-demand venues in college basketball. Night after night, it was packed to the brim, with fans who weren't just supporting a team. They were there specifically to watch Clark put on a show. And for the first time in decades, Pete Maravich's once untouchable scoring record was no longer something distant or abstract. It had entered the conversation in a way no one had truly imagined during her generation. But very few can dominate both roles at once, controlling the offense as a scorer while simultaneously elevating everyone around them as a creator. That dual threat is what elevated Clark from simply being great to something entirely unprecedented.
Finish behind the back again for Clark, give her another assist and a chance for a 3-point.
While also running the entire offense and drawing the opposing team's best defender every single night is a combination rarely seen at any level of the game. That level of responsibility alone separates good players from truly special ones. By the 2023-24 season, Iowa's run to the national championship game wasn't the result of Clark doing everything by herself. It was the product of a team that had grown around her leadership and playmaking, elevated by her ability to turn others into contributors on the biggest stage that is what defines a complete player. Not just someone who fills the stat sheet, but someone who consistently turns talent into wins. And that season became the one that ultimately rewrote history.
Oh, Caitlin Clark, rookie on rookie crime right there in Mule's face.
The 2023-24 season arrived with a sense of inevitability. By the time it tipped off, Caitlin Clark had already moved into 2nd place on the NCAA all-time scoring list, surpassing Kelsey Plum's women's record and steadily closing in on Pete Maravich's historic mark at the very top. For weeks leading up to it, the momentum had been building. Media outlets that once gave minimal coverage to women's college basketball were now tracking Clark's scoring chase with the same intensity usually reserved for major playoff races and championship implications. Every game became part of a larger countdown, and every point brought her closer to a record that had stood untouched for more than half a century.
Free throw pushing Clark past Pete Maravich's more than 50-year-old record. 3,667 points.
ESPN dedicated full segments to the chase, while major newspapers pushed the story onto front-page sports coverage. Across social media, real-time scoring trackers, record comparisons, and highlight clips circulated non-stop as the countdown to history intensified. Even opposing arenas felt the impact. Many scheduled their largest seating configurations and sold out tickets specifically because fans wanted to say they were there if the record was broken on their home court. In Iowa City, hotels filled up for game weekends with visitors who had no direct connection to university. Just basketball fans who recognized they were witnessing something historic and didn't want to miss the moment it arrived. From that point on, every possession carried weight. Each time she caught the ball, each time she crossed midcourt, the anticipation inside the arena grew louder and heavier. You could sense it in the rising volume of the crowd, in the constant focus of every camera locked onto her, and in the feeling that the game itself was moving towards something inevitable.
6 on the shot clock. Clark, a deep 3! Oop, shot is and knocks that one down, and it's a big one.
You could see it in her teammates' eyes, locked in with fierce competitiveness, yet carrying a sense of awe they couldn't quite hide. Then came the moment in the second quarter. Caitlin Clark stepped into space, pulled up from well beyond the arc, the kind of deep three that had become her trademark. The kind most players hesitate to even consider and let it fly. The shot dropped, her teammates rushed her in celebration, her coaches embraced her. Even players from Michigan stepped forward to acknowledge what had just happened. And for the first time, the weight of the moment showed clearly on Clark herself, an unfiltered reaction that went beyond stats or highlights. It was recognition that a lifelong pursuit had finally reached its destination. The numbers behind that season only deepened the significance. In 2023-24, Clark averaged over 31 points per game, an elite mark at any level of basketball. She also added nearly 9 assists per game, reinforcing her status as one of the most complete offensive forces the sport has ever seen. By the end of her college career, she finished with 951 total points. But what truly separates her is how she delivered when everything was on the line. In the 2023-24 NCAA tournament, her performances rose with the stakes. She didn't shrink under pressure, she elevated Iowa through it. In critical late-game moments, she hit shots that seemed to defy both logic and expectation, turning impossibly difficult attempts into defining memories.
For the win!
People that we were able to bring together and show how great this.
And she carried herself through it all with a calm that made it feel like these moments were never new to her, like they had already been lived 1,000 times in quiet gyms long before the spotlight arrived. From the time she first picked up a basketball, it was as if Caitlin Clark had been preparing for exactly this stage. The night she officially stepped into basketball history, the reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The record falling wasn't treated as a side note or a niche accomplishment. It landed squarely in the center of the sports world's attention. Across broadcasts, podcasts, social media, and news outlets, there was a shared recognition that something genuinely historic had just taken place. Coaches, analysts, former players, and journalists all reached for the same kind of language reserved for rare, defining moments in sports. It wasn't debated, it was acknowledged. Even LeBron James, the player who has long stood as benchmark for modern basketball greatness, publicly recognized Caitlin Clark's achievement. That moment carried its own weight. The athlete who has defined excellence for an entire generation was now acknowledging a 22-year-old from Iowa who had just rewritten one of the sport's most enduring records. And in that recognition, the significance of what Clark accomplished became even clearer.
The WNBA, Caitlin Clark dominating the court, inspiring young women in many ways in her sport and people just to play sports.
Something that had never been seen in the entire history of the sport. The fact that Caitlin Clark's name was even being mentioned alongside LeBron, James in serious basketball analysis, without hesitation, without qualifiers, was itself proof of how dramatically she had shifted the conversation around women's basketball. That kind of comparison used to feel out of place. Now it felt natural, the voices cracked. There were pauses where professional training usually fills the silence. Instead, there was hesitation, the kind that happens when someone is witnessing something unfold in real time rather than simply describing it. That brief silence echoed far beyond the live broadcast, especially once clips began circulating online. In many ways, that reaction communicated the weight of the moment more clearly than any statistical breakdown ever could. These were people who had spent their lives around elite basketball, and even they recognized they were watching something unfamiliar. But the significance didn't stop at sports media. It spread quickly into the wider cultural conversation. Major national outlets that rarely devote attention to college athletics ran full features on the achievement. Public figures from politics, entertainment, and commentary, many with no direct connection to basketball, offered their reactions. All of it unfolded during a broader national conversation about women's sports, visibility, and investment. And in that moment, Clark's record didn't just become a sports headline, it became part of a much larger cultural shift.
As Caitlin Clark became the leading scorer in the NCAA Division I basketball, woman or man.
Equal recognition and visibility, and Caitlin Clark's rise landed like a defining moment in that ongoing shift. The long-standing belief that women's sports could not consistently deliver mainstream, must-watch performances had already been weakening for some time. By 2024, that idea no longer held up under scrutiny. What Clark delivered was not just impressive, It was undeniable, and the sports world responded accordingly. LeBron James has long represented the standard for individual greatness in modern basketball. In that sense, placing Clark in the same conversation wasn't about equality of context, it was about acknowledging influence. Several opposing coaches even spoke openly about how difficult it was to prepare for her, describing game plans that accounted for everything on paper, only to watch her still find answers they had not anticipated. That is where the idea of a new era begins, when you move beyond the final number, beyond 2. 922 points and the record-breaking basket itself, the story becomes something larger than statistics. It becomes a case study in timing. What happens when a generational talent arrives in a sport at the exact moment it is ready for transformation? The numbers from the 2023-24 season reflect that shift clearly. Regular season broadcasts reached viewership levels the sport had never experienced before. The NCAA tournament set records not only for women's basketball but for college basketball more broadly. And the national championship matchup between Iowa and South Carolina drew more than 24 million viewers, marking one of the most watched games in the history of the sport.
In the history of women's college basketball, Caitlin Clark and Iowa going up against the South Carolina Machine.
It became the most watched college basketball game, men's or women's, in more than 30 years. Over 24 million viewers tuned into a women's college basketball matchup, a number that simply would not exist in that form without Caitlin Clark at the center of it. Off the court, the impact was just as dramatic. Iowa women's basketball merchandise shifted from a small, localized market into a nationwide demand trend. Road games became major events, with opposing arenas filled not just with home fans, but with people traveling specifically to watch Clark play. Conversations around the team changed as well. Discussions about her performances, her scoring runs, and her influence on the game became common in ways that simply hadn't existed before for a women's college player. And that momentum didn't stop at the college level. The ripple effect reached the WNBA almost immediately. In the 2024 WNBA draft, Caitlin Clark was selected first overall by the Indiana Fever, marking the next step in a career that had already begun reshaping the sport at every level it touched.
With the first pick in the 2024 WNBA draft, the Indiana Fever select Caitlin Clark, University of Iowa.
Her arrival sparked an immediate surge in every measurable category: ticket sales, television ratings, and merchandise revenue, on a scale the WNBA had never seen before. Games featuring Caitlin Clark began drawing audiences that at times matched or even outpaced NBA regular season broadcasts on the same networks. The league she entered as a rookie was no longer the same commercial landscape that existed just a year earlier. It had visibly transformed. The girls who saw Caitlin Clark surpass Pete Maravich were seeing a new definition of possibility, and the players who come after her will grow up understanding that her final collegiate mark, 3,951 career points, is no longer just a record, but a new standard, a new peak to chase. Somewhere right now, in early morning workouts or late night gym sessions, someone is already looking up at it, measuring the climb ahead. One shot that stood for half a century, erased in a single moment. That, in its simplest form, is the Caitlin Clark story. A kid from Iowa who competed against boys in middle school, chose a program few expected to rise to national prominence, and proceeded to rewrite the record book so completely that the entire sports world paused to ask, what did we just witness? 24 million viewers for a women's college basketball game, sold out WNBA arenas across the country, a generation inspired as they watched the ceiling break in real time. The record was the headline, the transformation is the story.